All right, let's get started. Kind of in an unusual way, at least in this class, but not incorrect, or there's nothing wrong with starting this way, but we're going to start with a little bit of stretching and warming up. This is the marauding bear, very similar to cat-cow. So we do a little marauding bear, just stretch things out a bit. Notice how we feel. I'm definitely feeling a little stiff this morning. Maybe a little stiffer than I would like. And then when we're done with that, let's go ahead and come into a little bit of down dog. Legs, right? Thighs, knees, hips, toes. So just give all of those, you have a lot of joints down there. So give them all a little love. And then we'll do a dragon flying high as our first yin posture. Left foot forward, right knee to the ground, and then torso up and back. Sorry if my head is cutting off. We don't do a lot of these kinds of lunges in yin, so I've tried to optimize the camera angle for most of the yin postures, but without a camera person to change the angle for me, this one can be a little difficult. All right, so with that out of the way, we want to feel a stretch here at the front of our right hip, right? Right hip. You brought the left foot forward. A lot of times when we're doing lunges in classes, we bring the right foot forward first, okay? But there's a very specific reason why I did that. I want you to stretch your right hip. The whole class today is right, left, right, left, right, left. Okay, so right hip, which means that needs to be behind us because of what we're stretching. I don't know if you can feel it in your body, but there's really not much happening with this leg, at least in this position. If we were to tuck the back toe and lift it, then this leg is now being asked to be strong. And we do that a lot in the other class, right? We do like the high lunge, the crescent lunge, the warrior one, the warrior two. In all of those positions, this leg is going to work. This leg will stretch. But with our knee down, what we're really saying in this posture is we're not really interested in strengthening this leg. Once I bring that knee down, what I'm really saying is I want to stretch this as much as I can. Okay? Also, the knee being down is very often helpful in creating that stretch. Now, another thing I want to point out here is your torso needs to be up and back. What everyone, not everyone, but what a lot of people want to do in this posture is they want to start coming down like this. And the reason they're doing that is they're trying to avoid the very stretch we're trying to create, which is right here. And they just intuitively can feel that if they come down, there's less intensity in the posture. Well, we're trying to create this intensity. Now, obviously, in every class, I talk about safety. So if that really feels unsafe, then maybe you back off a little bit. Maybe you do tilt forward slightly, but I'm guessing for most of you, you're healthy enough that that's not going to be the case. You're not actually injuring yourself here. It just feels extremely uncomfortable. And for me too, I'm going to say that. These postures, I don't do them because they feel good in the moment. A lot of times when I'm getting a massage, the therapist I'm working with, it actually hurts what he or she is doing. I'm not doing it just to feel good in the moment. Okay, let's switch sides. Okay, take your time. A tabletop or a down dog is usually good. All right, so same thing, and sorry if I'm kind of out of frame a bit. Left hip, front of the left hip. And generally you want that on the right side, you want the heel directly under the knee, more or less. It doesn't have to be like absolutely perfect, but that's generally what you're going for. And then again, torso up and back. Some people might go a lot further than that than I'm doing. I don't have a particularly flexible back, but if you do, then you might find yourself pushing back a little further, okay? Now, the reason the upper body is important is because the hip flexors, which we are targeting with this particular articulation, this is called hyperextension. Again, this bone is your femur, your thigh bone. So we've hyperextended the femur, and what that's generating for us is a hip flexor stretch, as long as our spine is also involved. Otherwise, we tend to lose that stretch. It's not really as effective as it could be. And it's also, if we're getting it, it's probably getting more of our quads, the rectus femoris, which is a hip flexor, but it's more of the lower part, because the upper part of the hip flexors, I'd say the majority of the hip flexors actually, are really in the upper body there, so we don't want to miss those, okay? So hip flexors are the rectus femoris, the sartorius, the psoas major, and the iliacus. There's a British anatomist that I know of who calls it the iliacus. I don't really know which pronunciation is correct. So most of the American anatomists and people who taught me, they call it the iliacus, okay? So those are your four hip flexors. And if you know anything about anatomy, you know that rectus femoris, also, again, another name there, femoris. Some people call it rectus femoris. Again, I'm not sure if there's like a official proper way of pronouncing it. For instance, my ex-girlfriend, who's a surgeon, she didn't like the way I pronounced fascia. I think she pronounces it fascia. So again, I don't know if there's an official right or wrong way, if the British and Americans pronounce it differently. It's just human language. Okay, let's go ahead and come on out of that, and we'll rest for a moment. And as usual, that's called a rebound. I'll be right back. Okay, good. We'll bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze. We're going to shake it off. And then let's go ahead and hinge up. Okay, so pendulum implies a sort of back and forth, and that is our intention today. So we brought the leg back, now we want to bring the leg forward. And what that means is we're going to be targeting our hamstrings. Okay, so let's start with our right leg straight, left foot to the inside of the thigh. Again, we're intending to always start with the right leg, have that consistent throughout the class. And then we come forward and down. And as usual, you can support your knee, forearms, or forehead if necessary. We want to feel it back here. You have 4 hamstrings: semimembranosus, semitendinosus, biceps femoris long head, and biceps femoris short head. You're more than welcome to flex or point your foot in whatever direction you want. You can also just keep it relaxed like I'm going to do. And for most people, this is usually not a difficult or scary posture, for lack of a better way of putting it. Okay, so I'm probably not going to say much about safety here because for most people it isn't a problem. One thing I will say, and I've said it often, and I'll say it again because it's something I consistently see students doing in classes, is I really do not recommend this pulling yourself down because it unnecessarily increases your risk of injury here, and it doesn't bring anything that you can't get by modifying the posture. And if you're not sure how to modify the posture, just ask me, and I'll be happy to show you. You can ask me before or after class. You can message me. I'm happy to show you. Okay? So this doesn't really bring anything to the table except increased risk of injury. So I recommend we just don't do that. It might feel good in the moment. Unfortunately for us human beings, many things can actually feel good in the moment that are ultimately injurious long term with repeated use. So smoking is a good example of that. Once you're over the initial coughing fits that you're likely to have when you start smoking, once you get used to it, you feel good when you smoke. I hope everybody knows it's not actually good for your health. So again, hopefully this illustrates for us that this can be true not just of smoking cigarettes, but also of yoga postures. There can be things that we do in yoga. In the short term, they feel very good. In the long term, they actually can generate injuries. So I try and point those out when that's the case. The opposite is also true. And I think you've all heard me speak about that before, that some things that actually feel painful or difficult in the moment, unpleasant, actually long-term lead to us feeling a lot better. Maybe not just physically, but actually mentally and emotionally as well. All right, let's switch sides. This is half butterfly. Very, very common posture that we do. We do this one a lot. All right, everybody. So let's take a moment to relax and rebound. Okay, so bringing the legs in, we'll give them a little squeeze and shake it off. And then hinging up to seated. Okay, so now we'll come into a tabletop facing the long side of the mat. And we'll do a kickstand next. So you may want to move over toward the left edge or left side. And then we simply take the right leg straight out to the right, bringing the legs as far apart as possible. And we're looking for a stretch in the inside of the thigh. That's the adductors, what are called adductors, adductors, also known as your groin. Okay. Again, the feet can point in any direction that seems to feel safe and both effective for you, for getting a good solid stretch that is within your range of what you're comfortable doing, or feel safe doing, I should say. Comfort, again, doesn't always come with that. You can stay on your hands, drop down to your elbows. You can have your left foot flexed or pointed, pulled in toward your buttocks or pushed back behind your knee. Your hips can stay over the knee or press back toward the heel. Okay, so those are pretty much all the different options we have here with the legs. So you have 5 adductors: adductor magnus, longus, brevis, gracilis, and pectineus. Generally speaking, with the legs straight here, we're probably getting more of the longer adductors, longus, magnus, and gracilis. And then if you feel stretch here, the bent leg, if you will, that's probably more of pectineus and brevis. But again, as I mentioned right at the start of the class, you can't isolate things using body stretches in a precise way. So it's likely they're both getting a little bit of all of them. They're all attached in a group. And that's part of the reason why in these classes that I teach, I don't talk about targeting individual muscles, because it's not really possible with yoga postures, nor do I really think it's actually important or beneficial. The body, as I said, was formed as a whole, as a unity. And as such, it tends to operate as a unity. Now, this is in contrast to how Western science and medicine has approached the body. Western science and medicine tends to approach the body in an I don't know what the right pronunciation for the word is. It tries to separate everything, so here's a finger, here's a finger bone, here's this part, here's that part. And if you look at the progression of Western science, it's basically gone from breaking the body down to plants, to animals, and eventually into cells, and then into atoms, and eventually to what we call quanta, which is sort of a mix between energy and solid matter. Let's switch sides. Okay, so left side here. Again, nice stretch in here that feels safe and effective.
So scientists didn't really find what they were expecting to find in their quest. When they found the atom was actually what they thought was the building block of everything. And that's why they called it the atom. Actually, that's what that was supposed to imply, that this is the building block from which everything else has been built. There's nothing, you can't divide things further. Unfortunately for them, they eventually did divide things further. So I remember even as a child reading about neutrons and protons and all that. So they found that the atom is actually mostly empty space, and it's sort of like a little miniature planet. You have this nucleus, and then you have these neutrons and protons basically circling around the nucleus. And then when they were able to divide those pieces further, this is when they began to discover what are called quanta. And quanta don't behave like atoms or other things. There's no predicting with 100% certainty their location. And in fact, they found that observing them actually changes the probability. So that brought up a lot of questions for Western science that we're still grappling with. There's a lot of really weird and unusual things that happen on a quantum level that most of us would feel like is magic or isn't true. So for instance, one of the quantum realizations is that basically matter is made up of mostly empty space. So my body, to my senses, it feels very solid. It feels like there's a lot of mass here and it's very real. But you could say on another level, on a quantum level, that really isn't true ultimately. That really ultimately everything we see is solid. The planet, the earth, our bodies, all this stuff is actually mostly just empty space with some kind of energy dancing around it. What's interesting about this from a yogic perspective is it sounds very similar to what a lot of Buddhists and tantric yogis were saying about the nature of reality, that it ultimately is energy and it's ultimately empty. There isn't really solid things like we experience them. Okay, let's come on out of that and we'll rest for a moment on our back. All right, let's bring our legs in. We'll give them a little squeeze. We shake it off. And then we'll hinge on up and let's do our next set. Okay, so that was called abduction, and what we'd like to do now is called adduction. So I bring my right knee toward the left. I can pull that foot back, and I can do the same thing here with my left leg. Okay, this is called a shoelace. So adduction is when the limbs are coming across the midline. So I hope that's clear. Now, some people have difficulty with this, and if you do, then I recommend going onto your back and using your hands to manually pull the legs instead. Otherwise, if your ankles and knees and hips feel okay, then just simply fold forward and you'll
feel a stretch out here. These are our glutes, and these are 10 muscles basically that we're looking at here. 4 primarily in this stretch, and then we will look at 6 in our next stretch, okay? The 6 other ones. So again, can we isolate them? No, not so much. We're probably stretching all of them to a greater or lesser degree. So, as I was saying a moment ago, the Western approach, the one that we tried, and I think, I don't know, I'm not on the cutting edge of, you know, modern scientific research. I certainly think that viewpoint has not exhausted itself completely. I think there are still people who are very much in science and medicine who still approach things that way. And that way of thinking, by the way, is, again, a sort of, it basically is a mechanistic approach to things. Again, parts, different parts. It's very much about separating things apart. And the idea is that if I could find the basis of all life, if I could find the part that everything is made of, then maybe I can fix and manipulate everything because I found that basic building block part, right? And so if I manipulate that, then I'll be able to create and fix whatever I want, right? That's sort of the basic approach or idea. And again, I usually refer to that as a kind of mechanistic approach. And so we approach the body in the West generally from the idea of parts that can be replaced, right, and fixed. That's surgery. And then the other approach that we embrace is chemistry, because these are both hard sciences, what we call hard sciences, right? So I can get in there and I can cut and sew and replace, or I can introduce chemicals into the human body that will alter its makeup, and those are what we call drugs, obviously. So those are our 2 main therapies that we have in the West, is drugs and surgery. And this is in contrast to, again, the Eastern approach, which is much more holistic. So again, the body is not a bunch of separate parts. It's actually one unified whole. Let's switch sides. Okay, so again, pulling the knees across one another and looking for that stretch. You might feel it in both, but we definitely want to feel it on that left side. So it actually extends beyond the body. That's what's interesting, is most these systems usually also have a very keen awareness of the seasons, the environment, diet. So again, you bring things into your body from the outside through what you eat. And so again, often in the West, I'm not saying there aren't exceptions to this. And again, I think at least in some circles, it's changing. But generally, again, a surgeon doesn't ask you what your diet is, how well you're sleeping, whether or not you're stressed out, if you are emotionally healthy. The doctors just, okay, you need knee surgery. Okay, let's go. What's interesting about this, from my perspective, is I'm starting to study with a non-dual teacher. Non-dual is one of several different really advanced spiritual philosophies, you could say, although it's not really a philosophy. And the tradition I'm trained in Zen, sorry, someone's ringing the bell. I'll be back in a moment.
Hey, I'm working. So can you come back in 30 minutes?
Yes, no problem.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, sorry about that. So the Zen tradition is considered a non-dual school, and in yoga there's also Advaita Vedanta, which is a non-dual school. So I'm studying with this teacher, and what's interesting is he had chronic back pain. And so this lasted for years. You know, he had painkillers, he had all kinds of things. And there was a physical thing going on, like they could see it in a scan. And one day his partner suggested that maybe this was actually psychosomatic. So psychosomatic usually means that it's a somatic is your body, right? But it's your what you believe or think, or your emotional repression or trauma is actually creating pain in your body. And he got really mad at that suggestion. All right, let's go ahead and come on out of that. I'll continue the story in a moment. Okay, we'll bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze, shake it off. And then when you're ready, hinge on up and come into a tabletop position. Okay, so give things a little stretch in tabletop. This is how we started, so it might be interesting to compare what you're feeling now. Definitely feeling less stiff in my body. So that's pretty much to be expected. And then a little down dog. Same thing here for the most part. Less stiff, feel more free to move. Okay, then we bring our right knee toward our right wrist, right foot across. This is the sleeping swan. Okay. And you can stay up on your hands, drop down your elbows. Your right foot can flex or point. Your right shin bone can be at an angle, or you can have it parallel with the front edge of your mat, depending on your flexibility. Your knee can point straight ahead or out to the side, and your hips can rock to the left or to the right, and that can change the stretch you're feeling here. We're going for those deep rotators. There's 6 of them, and so that's what we're trying to target here. This is femoral rotation that we're focused on here now, okay? What's called external rotation. All right, so this teacher that I'm studying with, non-dual teacher, his partner sort of suggested that, hey, maybe this actually has to do with emotional repression, or sort of maybe it's more of a spiritual question, and it's not just the physical thing that's going on. And like I said, he got angry at that suggestion. But what's great about my teacher is that he ultimately is more interested in the truth than anything, and he's curious, so he'll question his own assumptions about things. And as he started questioning and looking, he actually found that yes, that there was a lot of emotional pain that had been repressed that was tied to the physical pain that he's experiencing. And over time, he was completely able to heal his pain. Now, as I understand, I haven't actually asked him personally about this, so I'm not sure, but my understanding is if you were to take a scan of his back, it still is messed up. So physically, there hasn't been a change, but he's no longer in chronic pain. He doesn't have to do anything anymore. And if you think that this is impossible, know that it's not. There are people, when doctors take scans of their back, they actually go to them and say, hey, do you feel back pain? Do you have a lot of back pain? And they say no. But the scans show the same as what someone who claims they're in chronic back pain show. So there's all kinds of herniations of the discs, all kinds of, maybe bones are fractured, and the doctor thinks, wow, you should be in a lot of pain. And they say, no, I'm fine. I feel great. Let's switch sides. Okay, side 2. The flip side of that is that there are people who go to their doctor and they say, Doc, I'm in so much pain, I cannot work, I cannot do anything. And I'm not talking about people who are strung out on opioids and they're, just looking for the doctor to prescribe something. They legitimately, they're not working, they're in constant pain. Doctor says, okay, let's take a scan. I take a scan of their back, nothing, perfectly healthy. And yet here's a person who is complaining about non-stop debilitating pain. So this brings us to another interesting point. And again, I bring up these things, they're not necessarily directly related with yoga, but I actually think they're very relevant, and that's why I talk about them. I also find these things fascinating, and I find that these are things that in common conversations and talk, people don't talk about this stuff. So it's almost like these are things that happen, but people sweep them under the rug because it's uncomfortable. It calls into question their belief system and kind of their ideas about things, what they, the way they understand the world. That can be scary for human beings. So again, sometimes when I talk about these things, people really can resist and get upset because they feel like, just like my teacher, when his partner said, hey, maybe this is actually psychosomatic, he got pissed at that idea. Actually ended up being true. He's actually able to cure his chronic pain by exploring his emotional repression, not physical rehabilitation. In fact, I think the doctors basically said there's really nothing that you can do. Anyway, so there are both sides of it. There are people who have quote unquote damaged parts of their body and they are completely free of pain. There are people who have completely healthy bodies yet report chronic pain. So the truth is we don't really know what pain is. We know when we're in it, but medically speaking, we don't have a systematic thing for pain, okay? We can take brain scans, we can take, blood pressure, we can do all kinds of amazing things. We can see stars that are dead across the galaxy that have been dead for millions of years, billions of years. And you know how we measure pain? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much pain are you in? So it's completely subjective. It's completely your experience. Sure, a doctor can look at your arm that's been severed and see and guess you're probably going to be in a lot of pain. But it doesn't really work as one-to-one as we might expect. All right, let's go ahead and come on out of that. We'll make our way onto our back.
All right, we'll bring those legs in, give them a little squeeze and shake it off. And then we'll hinge up. Last set, this is a saddle pose, half saddle rather. So we bring the foot back, toes can point back or out to the side. You can pad this foot if it needs it. Knee can point straight ahead, out at an angle. You can sit on a block if you feel that that's helpful or necessary. Okay, and because we're looking at rotation today, if it feels safe, you can bring that foot away from your thigh and increase the rotation. Be very mindful of your knee. All right. Now, if you're feeling a stretch in the front of your thigh, I recommend you just stay there. If you don't, you can begin lowering back to the hands, elbows onto a bolster, crown of your head, or all the way back onto your back. So again, pain, it seems very black and white to us. It seems like, okay, if the doctor takes an MRI and she sees damage in my spine or damage in my hip or damage in my shoulder, that explains my pain. And I'm not denying that, but I am trying to get you to question that narrative might be as cut and dry as we like to think. And again, this just brings us back to this sort of holistic approach that the body, the heart, the mind, and actually our environment and everyone around us, the people around us, the planet, even the universe, that all of these things are playing into our condition. And that maybe there's more than one way, one avenue through which we can heal something. And so again, we might go to the doctor and she might say, well, you've got this thing in your back and you're going to need this kind of surgery. Or in the case of my teacher, doctor might say, you've got this thing and there's nothing we can do for you. We can give you painkillers, but that's it. And my teacher, just a little background, he had dealt with serious addiction in his younger life. So getting on painkillers and addicted to painkillers wasn't something that he wanted to do. So he did use them because the pain was so excruciating. He used them sparingly. And when he felt like it was really absolutely necessary. So he would say he would use them enough to do his sort of meditative process and begin pulling up these deep repressed emotions. And as he did that, eventually the pain began to subside and eventually his disappeared completely. So you've probably heard me say before, the reality is there's much more we don't know as human beings than we do know. That's just a fact. That's a scientific fact. Any true scientist will agree with that statement. Now, they might argue that, modern science has ruled certain things out, but that's also not true, actually, from a truly scientific perspective. Science never rules anything out forever. That's impossible. That goes against the very nature of scientific inquiry. Okay? All right, let's switch sides. There's a wonderful, very long book. And you can listen to it, so you don't have to read it. I listened to it, but it's a very long, wonderful book called *Sapiens*, and it's about the history of our species, and it's really quite enlightening on many levels about our experience as human beings, and it really can explain a lot kind of about our experience. So highly recommend that if you're interested in picking up a new book. It is a long read, so you got to be ready for that, but definitely worth it. So in that book, at a certain point, he basically talks about the scientific method. He talks about a lot of things, but he sort of explains how what made science so powerful was science's willingness to prove itself wrong. He said basically up to that point, you had cultures and religions that there were certain beliefs and ideas that couldn't be questioned, right? So if something made you uncomfortable or made you call into question God's existence or whatever it is, those things were like banished by the church or by, it doesn't have to be just in the West. Whatever religion, if you're in a tribe, if something makes you question whether or not a certain deity or whoever is taking care of you, then those beliefs or ideas are just not looked at by the people. So if you think of like the gentleman, his name's escaping me right now, who discovered that the Earth was round and that it revolved around the sun. The church fought him on that, and because the church felt threatened by that, because they had always taught that no, the sun revolves around the Earth. And so again, if we were not committed to science, that would be something that then was thrown out. Part of the problem is that scientists are people, and they're groups of people. Scientific institutions are, again, institutions made up of people. And people are subject to superstition, to fads, to all the things that everyone else is, and scientists are just as guilty of this as anyone else. So there can be fads in science, certain beliefs or ideas that at a certain time are getting a lot of funding and support, and papers get published, and then if you have a different idea, even though it's scientific and you want to explore it scientifically, you might find there's no funding, or your peers laugh at you. You're ostracized. A lot of people who started in the 60s studying meditation and yoga using science, they experienced that. Their fellow scientists were like, why are you wasting your time on that? That's not going to get you anywhere. Now, every day we hear another study of how beneficial meditation, yoga, all these things are. All right, let's go ahead and come on out of that. So I want to be clear, I'm not coming down against science. I am just trying to make you aware that the scientific community and science as it's practiced in reality isn't free of bias. Science itself ideally is free of bias, but just because the FDA says something, just because the CDC says something, just because the World Health Organization says something, just because you read a study published in the New York Times, that doesn't mean that's the last word on that subject. There's also bad science, right? So we want to be careful about just accepting scientific proof as the final word on anything. At the same time, the scientific method, when it's practiced properly, is extremely powerful for helping us uncover at least physical truths. Whether science will ever help us with spiritual truths or emotional truths or those types of things, who knows? All right, let's bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze, shake it off. And then as usual, we'll finish with 6 minutes of stillness and relaxation. So set your timer